Hi there, I'm James Dapperchi, and this is Coffee and a Case Note. So team, today we have a chat about a piece of real property in Coffs Harbour in New South Wales in Australia that is co-owned by 3 siblings. And these siblings can't get along and decide what they'd like to do with the property. And so what happens is 2 of the siblings, who we're going to call the plaintiffs for today's discussion, they come to the court, and what they do is they get appointed Section 66G trustees for sale. And in order to get a Section 66G trustee for sale appointed, you essentially come to the court and say, hey, I co-own this property with some other people, we're not getting along, and we need some independent people to come in to sell the property and to distribute the proceeds of that sale in the proportion of our co-ownership, while also taking out their fees and any fees relating to the sale. That makes sense? 3 co-owner siblings, 2 of them come to court and say, we can't agree on what to do, so we'll get this independent person to come in, sell the property. And so what happens is, tick, that independent person gets appointed, then that independent person goes off, or those independent people go off and attend to their work, right? They head off, sell the property, and they get a sum into the statutory trust, they get all that money in, and they then turn around to say, well, let's take out our remuneration, our fees, let's take out the real estate agent fees and the legal fees for preparation of the sale contract and all these sorts of things. Let's come to a net amount of money, and now let's turn to the beneficiaries of the trust, these 3 siblings, and think about distributing the net proceeds of this sale. The 2 plaintiff siblings go, yeah, fine, we'll take our 1/3, 1/3 distribution, and they take their 1/3 of the net, off they go. So the 2 plaintiffs are dealt with and disposed of. The 3rd sibling, who for the purpose of today's discussion we might refer to as the defendant, resists. And the defendant resists on a number of bases, some of which are covered in sort of voluminous bits of correspondence that sibling sends through to the trustees, contesting the way the trust has been administered and sharing their frustrations and criticisms of the way the trustees have gone about things. And those frustrations and criticisms sort of take 2 broad forms we can summarise. One type of frustration or criticism of the trustees we might refer to as time recording. So saying, hey, all these time entries for doing task A for $10, task B for $10, task C for $10, or whatever the amount is, all of these time entries, or a large proportion of them, are improper, and I'm critical of the trustees for having attended to these tasks and incurred these fees in doing so. So I'll think of that as time recording issues. The other set of issues we might think of as professional conduct issues, or perhaps as the defendant would characterise it, professional misconduct issues, where the defendant is essentially criticising the steps taken by the trustees in relation to their sale of the property. And these are voluminous criticisms, and the court takes some time in working through the nature of all of them. Now, what happens, if you'll recall, is that the defendant has been offered 1/3 of the net proceeds that went to the plaintiff. So sibling 1 got their 1/3, sibling 2 got their 1/3, sibling 3, our defendant, was offered their 1/3 and said, no, I'm not providing you my bank account details, I'm not accepting that amount, and instead raises all these criticisms. This is in about 2021, these criticisms start being raised. The defendant then engages lawyers to really press these criticisms, which then requires the trustees to engage their own lawyers to sort of resist these criticisms and defend their position. The defendant later says, okay, withdraws the criticisms, withdraws the instructions of their lawyers, and says, oh, actually, now my position is, I'll just take that 1/3 that went to sibling 1 and sibling 2, thanks, that's fine, and I'll be out of here. And the trustees take the, with great respect, fairly reasonable approach to say, well, no, we've now gone and incurred all these fees as a result of you raising these criticisms. And so we have to take your 1/3 and deduct remuneration for our time spent for engaging with you and for the costs of the lawyers we've had to engage in order to deal with these issues. On hearing this, the defendant's sort of criticisms are reignited again, and any path to a negotiated outcome, the trustees have been trying to negotiate over a number of years, all those paths to negotiation sort of fall away, and the trustees bring this application we're discussing today by way of notice of motion. And today's motion, the notice of motion lodged by the trustees, what they are trying to do is to say, hey, can we, coming to the court to say, hey, can we distribute X dollars, the amount will come to this defendant, and can we then retire? Can we say that having distributed X dollars and made these sort of deductions, can we go, yeah, that's it, that's all that's going to be left for this statutory trust? So that's the application we're looking at today. So the court has to work through the way the trustees conducted themselves. And one of the findings the court makes is they were perfectly honest, perfectly reasonable, perfectly appropriate in the way they went ahead and discharged their duties. So the criticism of time entries and the criticism of professional conduct raised by the defendant, those criticisms fall away and they are not made out in relation to what the defendant is trying to say. So the court then goes out and looks at the arithmetic of saying, well, all right, if it was reasonable for the trustees to incur further costs for their own remuneration, their own work as trustees, as well as legal costs, the lawyers they had to engage in order to resist these allegations from the defendant and to bring the motion we are discussing about today, what is the quantum of those? Well, the court finds the trustees are seeking $11,000 in their own remuneration for their own personal work, and they find that amount is actually heavily discounted because the trustees elect not to charge for these times when they're trying to negotiate with the defendant, trying to find a way forward in relation to seeking an outcome to this dispute. So there's the discounted $11,000 that's going to be sought by the trustees, and then there's a figure of less than $50,000 of legal costs that also represents a discounted figure that's been discounted by the solicitors and the counsel engaged by the trustees as well. And so the court is left with this bit of arithmetic where the trustees say, hey, all we are seeking is to have our fees slightly discounted and our lawyers' fees, who they've also discounted, reduced from the 1/3 that would have gone to the defendant, and then have that amount paid out. What the court says is, well, look, it is appropriate and possible in some circumstances for one beneficiary's entitlement to bear the brunt of costs that have been incurred by trustees, and the court finds that this is indeed that case. And so sibling 1 and sibling 2 don't have their entitlements weighed down by all these costs that the defendant has forced the trustees to attend to, and the court follows the arithmetic put forward by the trustees. And so the defendant, who would have received about $235,000 if they just accepted their third, ends up receiving a little more than $160,000 after these adjustments are made. I hope that discussion assisted you, and I look forward to speaking again soon over another coffee and in respect of another case note. Cheers.